Please welcome Vihan Vee to QueerTWENTY, the cohort of 2021. Vihan is a passionate activist for queer rights, rights of sex workers, and other marginalized communities. Thank you so much, Vihan, for joining us.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
So, Vihan, at the forefront, I would like to ask you a very important question. How inclusive is the queer community? Do you think that women, people from backward castes, ethnicities, lower economic classes, do they get adequate representation?
Thank you for asking this question. So, you know that queer community is not a homogeneous community. The queer community have people coming from different kind of background, different kind of caste, ethnicity, geographical location. So, there are in queer community there are people. And queer community is a diverse community, but whenever we talk about decision making, whenever we talk about having leadership over something, then it always seen as people coming from certain kind of privileges can having this leadership, can leading this movement for a longest time. And when we are talking about these layers, it is also important to say that mostly people who are cis queer people are a part of it and leading it. But there are people from different backgrounds, different caste, ethnicity groups, but not having the leadership. So marginalized people always face this kind of discrimination within any kind of movement, and that I think that I can say that can be in part of that is as a part of queer community. And so I will say that there is not a inclusivity in hearing voices, there is not inclusivity to taking decisions. So the kind of narrative which are outside in public, in mainstream media, where people are talking about things about queer people, mostly people coming from privileged location, privileged backgrounds, voices are heard less than people who are coming from low socioeconomic status, they are coming from marginalized sections.
So, Vihan, when you actually do talk about representation, and when you do actually talk about how it's always the predominant castes or, well, more privileged genders which get to speak out on issues, if I can narrow down the scope a bit, on the trans spectrum, do you believe that there are inequalities as well, and especially in the lower economic classes when it comes to inclusiveness or access to resources?
Yeah, I think that you said it correctly. But to talk about it, we know that people coming from marginalized section are, whatever I spoke in first part, I think that it is also important to understand that when we talk about trans person, we can also see their similar kind of inequality and similar kind of differences because of their identity, because of their caste, and because of the geographical area they come from. So one thing we know that in our society we see that when trans persons want to talk about themselves, want to assert their identity, most of the time they face violence in their home, they face discrimination in society, and because of that most of trans persons leave their family, go outside, go to different cities and stay there and start their new life. But at the same time, whenever they want to go and they want to have a job, they want to access something which they want to access, that can be a house or a place where they want to stay, they face certain kind of discrimination. And when we see in society the kind of job offer for a trans people are also a job which cannot be seen as a respectable job in our society. And when I want to talk about mostly regarding the trans spectrum, we also know that there is invisibility in trans spectrum also for the trans men, because there are trans men who are in society, but whenever we talk about trans persons, we only see that there are a trans women, there are hijra persons who are in society. We don't really think about trans men because we invisibilize trans men. And so the voices in trans spectrum, also the voices which are heard most, are also coming from the spectrum where trans women's assertion, where trans women's narratives are out more. So I also here I also think that whenever we think that why there is invisibility for a trans man, why there is we see less trans men in society, or why we don't really think about trans men, it is also because we know that the socialization which in our society happens, the transition which trans women do from their gender identity which was given at birth is different than the transition which trans men do, because we also know that in our society whoever is a female assigned at birth, there is certain kind of notion, there is certain kind of discrimination which women in society also face. The same kind of violence and discrimination and same kind of stereotype had also given to the trans men when they are in their childhood and when they are growing up. So it also became difficult to navigate the spaces and to talk about their gender identity. And I think that this is these are the experience of most of the trans men or trans masculine people who are most of the trans masculine people.
No, absolutely, Vihan. And if I may ask, since you are speaking about voices being silenced and just a lack of representation, what are 3 ways in which these silences or these invisibilizations can be corrected in queer spaces?
So saying 3 ways will be really difficult, but to point out some things that can be, we also know that it is also whenever we want to talk about things, it is important to consciously say that people who are coming in panel or people who are coming for that consultation should not be only from certain kind of caste, certain kind of class. It is also important to have the representation, and actually when we say representation, that representation don't really think that representation is not for a tokenism, but that representation should be from all kind of sections. So today also when I myself identify as Ambedkarite trans man, and I come from a Bahujan background, but whenever people invite me, people say that you can talk on caste and trans persons, then means obviously I go and I talk there, but I also think that it is also important to see that people who are coming from margins, when we say it, we don't really want to focus on people who are educated and who can be talk about those identities, which is one kind of notion which people have in their head. When we say that there should be a representation, I think that there should be a representation from all kind of spaces. I think that if someone is not educated, but someone is working class trans persons coming from marginalized section, they should also be present in those meetings. Their opinion should also consider for that. So most of the time these things also happen, that whenever we want to talk about labor rights, whenever we want to talk about issues of trans persons, mostly people who are actually not doing those work are talking about it. So I think that when we say that the voices are important, so the voices from those section is also important. Second thing, I also think that it is important to see that it is important to reflect on oneself and see that what we are doing and what things we want to do, because most of the time in the name of community, we homogenize the community, and we don't think that there are people whose opinions, whose experiences might be different from this. We take one experience of trans persons and then we homogenize, universalize that experience of trans persons, and we don't really think about lot of things which can be different for different people because their experiences are different. So it is important to reflect on oneself and see that how for our community also, and see that how we want to think about it.
No, actually, Vihan, you brought up some excellent points, and you sort of it's very necessary to give voices to the voiceless. But then you also spoke about how laws need to change, and that's a very interesting arena that we are going to discuss now. I really want to know from you what you think are some areas in which government action is seriously lacking today.
Yeah, I think that if I want to talk about government, it will be that there are a lot of things government is doing, and I am means when you say that lacking of government action, then I will say that there is nothing which government is really doing great at this point of time, because means if I want to talk as a Bahujan trans person, then also I think that there are things which for my benefit government can say that there is a trans act which has came, and trans act can be used for trans persons for their rights and all those things, but trans act is not really helpful, and most section of trans community is against the trans act, because the kind of things trans act is asking, that one should need to do a medical transition for having gender identity, gender markers on their identity card as per their choice, and it is against Nalsa judgment and all those things. So that is one thing. So the trans act is not really helping. Other thing if I want to talk about is, then we know that nowadays people, some lawyers are filing cases for filing petition for having marriage right, but government is opposing it. So that is thing which I think that government is doing wrong. Means that doesn't mean that the thing which is petition which is in the court, I am with that petition, I completely agree with that petition, but I think that this is what government doing wrong. And going beyond that, if we want to say that there are a lot of things, like there are some laws which are coming up, like we know that nowadays anyone who is doing certain kind of activism had got certain kind of charges which can be a fake cases by government, which can be due to which people need to go to court, people need to stay in jail, and I can also say that the cases like UAPA sedition had their own people. But going beyond that, there are some cases where people went for some kind of rights which not for themselves but also for their colleagues, for community, and they had to go to jail for some stupid reasons which was not really which doesn't really require them to go to court. So I think that go in jail. There are some things and there are a lot of things like surrogacy bill, which is because of that surrogacy bill, we know that trans persons and queer persons don't really able to show that these are people who are our family members. Because of that, we want to have a child and all those things. So I think that the surrogacy law which is there, I think that it is also not really good. The new thing which is in the name of trafficking, the trafficking bill which is there in the Lok Sabha, I think that it is also important to see about that bill. So when we talk about trafficking, there is no agency on the person. So sex workers will not able to do will not able to work. Sex workers will not able to continue their work because of this law, because that law don't really do differentiation between their consent or right of person. There is no that thing. So there is that law is black and white, where that no one can if someone is doing sex work, then also it can be seen as that it is a trafficking and all those things. So I don't really think that government is doing things which are helpful for us. So lacking, if you will ask, then government is lacking on multiple things. There is no reservation for trans persons, which is important for us for getting education, for getting jobs. There is if going beyond, if we want to say that there is nothing for there is no scholarship for trans persons, for queer persons, and I think that it is important to have because historical marginalization. So I don't think that government is doing really good in lot of ways.
Thank you so much, Vihan. That was a very informative list of sorts, and I really hope that we head in the right direction. Since on public forums you are quite vocal about this issue, there is something I would like to ask you about. Let the viewers know what are some invisible challenges that are being faced by sex workers, especially in India today.
So means I will say that I'm not vocal on this topic, but I am alive for sex worker movement, and I think that it is important to talk about sex workers in this period of time. So I don't really want to talk on behalf of sex workers, but I think that there are many trans persons who are doing sex work and who are part of sex worker community, and today we know that because of COVID they are not really able to do their work, and because of COVID lot of things has happened, and they are the most ones who are affected because of COVID. And we know that now COVID is low, so people had starting their work again. The people who are working in people who are coming from working class background are again going outside and starting to do their work, but the sex worker community is not really able to do this, and some of them had started doing their work again, but some of them are not able to start their work again, and there is also a lot of stigma around sex work in general, but COVID had also affected it more. Going beyond that, I think that one thing which is I also mentioned in previous answer, that about about the trafficking bill, and I think that it is really important to talk about it and think about it, because the trafficking bill is actually not giving agency for sex workers who want to do their work and who want to continue work, and we know that in our country there is another law where we know that people who are above 18-year-old and who are adults have right to have their rights, have their agency. They can choose what is wrong and right for them. So it is, I think that criminalizing something means it is criminalizing sex work will not going to help, and it is not it is going to make a harm for a lot of people. And well, rather than doing harm, it is also important to think a little bit through the queer feminist lens, and it is also important to see that when we say that everyone have agency, and when we say that everyone can do whatever work they want to do, then in this case they will not able to do work what they want to do, and specifically government is not able to understand the consent in that bill, and consent is really important to think when we are talking about sex work, and when we are talking about trafficking law. And we also know that now one more bill had come into bill was discussed. There is amendment for MTP Act, that is regarding abortion, and the act which is regarding abortion, it is also, so that act is also something which is affecting trans persons also, because there are multiple trans persons who can also get pregnant, and mostly trans masculine persons can get pregnant, and it is not at all inclusive for trans persons, and I was not really expecting also that act will be inclusive for trans person, but it is important to talk about that and think about that. While talking about sex workers, it is also important to say that that act says that you need to show that if you want to go and want to have an abortion, you want to show that who is the father of that child, whose child it is, not only the person who is going, but also want to have other partner whose child that can be. So in the case of sex workers, it also became difficult to prove that relationship with another person who can be who can be a possibility, who can be a possible father, yeah, possible partner of that, means parent of that child. And I think it is also wrong to see that act in when we want to think through the perspective of through perspective of sex workers. And if I will go ahead, it will be a there will be a lot of things, but I think that I should not take that space, because sex workers can talk about their rights and what they are thinking is going wrong, because I am not a person who do sex work. I am the ally who think that sex workers movement should be live, and I can be there with them as an ally, because person coming from trans community are also doing sex works, and cis women sex workers are also been allied to the trans and queer movement for some time.
This is actually something very important that you've brought up. Talking about allies, what advice would you have for somebody who wants to be an ally but doesn't really know where to start?
Thank you for asking this question, but nowadays people are asking this question to be ally. We want to be ally for queer community, we want to be ally for trans community a lot, but I personally feel that whenever someone think that it is important to be ally to certain kind of movement, it is important to do certain kind of research. Go just Google it and read about who are trans persons, who are queer persons. Try to have certain kind of knowledge beforehand, rather than going and asking wrong questions to trans and queer people. That is most important, doing some research. Second thing, I will say that when you want to be ally, then it is if you are seeing that there is certain kind of injustice happening, yeah, there is certain kind of violence, discrimination happening on those community, that can be a queer and trans community, it is important for you to raise your own voice. It is important for you to talk about it and say that this is wrong. And if you are working in some organization, if you are working in any workplace, it is important to see that how inclusive that workplace is. And if you have some power, you can also try to make those changes, that workplace can be inclusive for trans and queer people, so more and more trans and queer people can able to go and access that place and will able to do their job. I think that allyship is not only just saying that we are ally, but it is more than saying that we are ally. It is doing some work. It is and doing some work doesn't mean that you are doing that work for trans and queer people, yeah, people coming from community. Doing that work will prove that you are ally. That is your allyship. I think that these are some things one should start doing while becoming ally.
So not just talking about it, but actually making an effort to do something.
Yeah, because nowadays people are talking about it. Now that if we are seeing that there are a lot of advertisement going online, which can be someone is doing. There was one advertisement of Karwa Chauth where a lesbian couple was doing Karwa Chauth. So means there are people who are trying to do something, and means some things which people from community doesn't really agree with it. So I think that when doing something doesn't really mean that taking away voices of trans and queer people. Yeah, doing something means doesn't really can be seen as that. It doesn't mean that you do something which is not actually queer persons and trans persons experiences are. But when you want to do something, it is important to see. It is important to see that what you can also do when you want to be ally. So the example which I given that it was that if you are in workplace and you know that you want to be ally for certain community, then if you have power, you can actually try and change some things in your workplace, which will gives more scope for trans and queer people to go and confront and talk about claim that space, rather than we can say that we want to be inclusive, there should be a inclusivity, rather than saying that we want to be inclusive but we don't find right candidate. You need to create that space where right candidate can come. because I means most of the time this happen that the processes are not inclusive, your workplace is not inclusive. How then trans and queer people can apply and can even come and be part of that space? Yeah, doing something can also be meant if there is pride, you can go and participate it, you can be ally there. Doing something can also be that if there is some protest which trans and queer people are doing because because they want certain kind of rights, certain kind of civil rights, you can go and be as ally, participate in it. I think that these kind of things we can consider doing something.
No, absolutely. And thank you so much, Vihan, for bringing all of these up and making sure that these enter conversations in the mainstream spaces. Thank you so much, Vihan, for joining us and speaking to us for QueerTWENTY, the cohort of 2021.
Thank you for inviting me.